Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for those who are watching. This is Let's Humanize the Workplace, and I'm going to have such an amazing conversation with Poornima. But first let's dig in because a lot is happening. Let's say there was an interesting demonstration in the Netherlands where a lot of Dutch people were advocating for getting more attention for Gaza, which I totally understand right now. And also, I am so proud also for the people that demonstrated this weekend for the No Kings protest or demonstration, which was the majority of my timeline was peaceful. I hope that it was peaceful for all, but it's really interesting how a lot of people are using their privilege to demonstrate for what's right, for what's democratical. And unfortunately, also, I have to bring to the attention that um, a lot of people are disagreeing with the other person, right? And I also want to have this conversation with Purnima, like with so much happening, we can still be respectful without believing the same thing, right? So that's what I hope to address within this conversation as well. But before, let's do a proper introduction. So Vivian Acquah, born and raised in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I am a certified inclusion strategist, but it's not about me. It's all about Purnima and her new book about Can I Say That, which is a guide for creating safe space for exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion. But who is Poornima? Who is she? So, she is an author of many books. Just find her on Amazon. She has so many books out there, DEI related, but also she is an associate professor at the Copenhagen Business School, where she provides effective DEI taught leadership from a global perspective. And I had the opportunity to meet her, I think a month ago, maybe longer than that, and I immediately also was there with Maria Lai, and we had a conversation like we need to have a conversation about your book, but also just a conversation about where do we go from here, because there's a lot happening in the DEI space where I'm seeing, companies that were sidelining DEI. Let's say that they are dealing with a lot of challenges, to put it lightly, but I'm also seeing a lot of hope. There is this lady who's a journalist who's keeps sharing posts about shareholders voting against anti-DEI, shareholders voting against anti-DEI, and that is a hopeful thing that I do want to address as well. And there's a lot happening on the water where so many companies are maybe redesigning DEI, but still doing DEI, focusing more on inclusion. But at the end, it's still DEI, so renaming it. But before I dive into that, let's bring in Purnima. And I am curious, what's your definition about humanizing the workplace and why do we need to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian, for having me. Hi, everyone who's joining. Delighted to be here. Vivian, it was such a treat to meet you, whatever it was, four or
Mhm,
5 weeks ago in
mhm,
Amsterdam. Great question to start us off, right? What does humanizing the workplace actually mean? I think when we look at our organizations today, we have to actually go back a little bit in history to see where does the modern organization actually come from, right? And if we go to the first industrial revolution, kind of post World War One era of thinking about how organizations were born, it was really the move from towards rather manufacturing and creating efficient production lines was really where the modern organization stems from.
mhm.
And it was all about, the employee punching their card in at, let's say, 9 a.m. or
Oh
8 a.m. in
yeah,
the
those
morning and
times. Yeah.
leaving at 5 p.m. It was about,
Mhm.
finding your space on a production line, and this was your task to do. And that was the vast majority of labor in a company was the product on the production line. And then of course you needed to manage these people, so you then created those hierarchies of management who would manage the employees, because the belief system was that, well, employees don't really want to work, and so you have to make them work, and you have to find incentives, and you have to make sure there's discipline, and that you are using coercive methods to keep them in line to ensure that the production levels and productivity is maintained. And that's really the history of where our workplaces come from. And it comes from this viewpoint of a capitalist model, about maximizing shareholder value, maximizing profits. And so today's modern organization is deeply rooted in those roots. And yet here we find ourselves, we are not in those times, and we are
Mhm.
in a, for the most part, in a knowledge AI world that we're living in. And human beings are the core resource for organizations. And at the same time, human beings have a lot of other aspects to our lives. Work is not everything. Generations have over time evolved in the viewpoints that we have around the role of work in our lives. And so
Mhm.
there's a shift needed in today's organization away from that bureaucracy, command and control type organizations, that were very much saw human beings as nothing but a resource. Look, I teach in the HR space, and I'm very anti the term human resources because it
Mhm.
suggests that human beings are nothing but a resource like bricks or cement or financial resources. But today we know that that's different. We know that people are asking more of our organization. So humanizing an organization is really about realizing and leveraging what human beings that we bring into the workplace. When we look at an organization, it is a societal system that is created to bring people together, yes, for a particular outcome, but it is also a system that provides a lot of community. It provides a
Mhm.
sense of belonging. It provides a space and a structure for human beings to be productive, to add value to society, and to feel good about that. Right. So we want to, when we think about humanizing a workplace, it's really about thinking about how do we create an environment that isn't just focused on shareholder maximizing shareholder value and profits, but it is very much about creating community. And when we create that community, when people thrive in the workplace, of course it leads to better outcomes. People are have better job satisfaction, then therefore productivity goes up, absenteeism goes down, turnover goes down, and yes, that has a positive impact on the bottom line as well. But humanizing the workplace is about creating an environment where everybody gets to thrive, and feels that deep sense of belonging, to me.
I love I want to pick two things out that you mentioned, right? So one thing is renaming or
Mhm.
redefining HR. How would you what would you how would you call HR, or how would you redesign
Yeah.
HR?
Well, a lot of the companies that I work with now have moved to people and culture teams, right? So,
Mhm.
um, talent is a tricky word. It's still used, but it is a tricky word, because talent has a lot of assumptions associated with
Mhm.
it, like who is
Yeah,
talented and who
exactly.
isn't, all of that. So, I think people and culture is a pretty good place to be because that is at the heart of it what an HR department in today's context is about. It's about
Mhm.
supporting the people of the organization and cultivating a culture where people are able to thrive.
And I also love the fact that you are talking about boosting communities in the workplace where where in the past it was all about let's create that work family,
Mm,
which
mm,
let's say that I wasn't a fan of, because let's say that my family members are not the way that some people in the workplace treated me, right, when it comes to
no.
exclusion and also inclusion. And I don't
Uh,
see I see my the workplace as a way to collaborate, as a way to fight loneliness, and also as a way to learn and to gather and to amplify all the skills that you have from within. But family was never the right word for me. So the fact
no.
that you are talking about community, and also how communities can boost resiliency, how they can boost the business sustainability as well, not for today, but for tomorrow as well.
Yeah,
Can you
absolutely. And
elaborate more on
there's a challenge with the use of family, right?
that? Hmm.
Because it's, when we look at today's organizations, I mean,
Yeah,
we are n- there's no organization today that is not subject to some degree of, you know, retrenchment,
yeah,
downsizing, or
hmm,
letting go of employees, right? And
yeah,
on a day-to-day basis, even firing employees for lack of
yeah,
performance or whatever it might be.
hmm.
And we don't do that to family members, do we? I mean, I guess if you leave spouses and partners out, maybe that's a different dynamic. But for your children, for
Yeah.
your parents, for
Hmm.
your siblings, we're all interconnected with each other.
Yeah.
Regardless of what our differences are, we try and work through them. It's not always do we work through them, but we are always deeply connected with each other. And
Yeah.
there's no letting go of your parents or letting go of your children. They are part of your
Hmm.
life, right?
Yeah.
And whereas in organizations, yeah, the reality is that any of us can be fired. Any of
Hmm.
us can be made redundant during a downsizing exercise. And do we really do that to family members? No. So I think communities
No.
better, because yes, in communities, people come, people go. That there's a sense of transition in communities as well. And then it's about how do we continue to keep that culture where people thrive despite the changes that happen in a community.
True. And also you have written a lot of books, but I want to focus on your recent book or the recent book that came out. Can I say that? And I was like, that's a very interesting book title. So who or what inspired you to write Can I Say That, which is a guide
Yeah.
for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah. Um, so when I was writing my first three books, so I have
Hmm.
three prior books in this space. So Diversifying Diversity, which looks at an intersectional view of diversity, The Art of Active Allyship, which really is about how do we cultivate a culture in our day-to-day interactions in the workplace, grounded in the concept of allyship. And the third
Hmm.
book, Leading Through Bias, which really looks at the biases that exist in our interpersonal relationships and systems and structures, policies, practices, and how do we block its influence. So when I was writing these three books, one of the themes that kept coming up over the last 5 years, 6 years of writing it, was the resistance, the
Hmm.
backlash, right? And
Yeah.
of course, we're seeing the peak, you could say, of the backlash to DEI today. Though I would argue that even if you went back to the civil rights movements, the women's rights movements, the LGBTQ plus rights movements in the
True.
early to mid 1900s, there's always been resistance. There's always
Hmm.
been some degree of resistance, and resistance is like a spectrum, right? So on one end you have hesitation towards DEI, just that little bit of, oh, do I want to engage in this or not, or you know maybe I don't, to all the way to the outright backlash that we're seeing today, that's coming out of the U.S. administration and of course companies then following suit. So I was curious about this because I really wanted to understand, like, where is this resistance really coming from, and getting a bit deeper into it, just beyond saying, oh, people are just anti-DI or anti-woke. But I wanted
Hmm.
to understand, where is that anti-DI, anti-woke sentiment coming from? Why are
Yeah.
people so emotionally charged about this topic? Why does it create that kind of polarization? But I wanted to
Hmm.
go deep. And that was really the motivation behind this book. So I spent 2 years researching this resistance and backlash. And of course, what my research showed is that DI is often seen as a
Hmm.
threat to the personal space that I have occupied, the resources I have access to, the opportunities that I've had in my work context and perhaps in society as well up till this point in time. It's the threat to my belief system, my values, my culture, what I hold as very, very important to me. And so as human beings, when we're confronted with a threat, our amygdala, pops up and it takes over and it creates a whole
Hmm.
host of emotions, right?
Hmm.
Everything from feeling a bit of panic to dread to feeling anxious, overwhelmed, maybe even feeling inadequate and like, I don't know enough about this topic. How can I be talking about it? And
Exactly.
what it turns out is that the research on emotions, prior research, shows us that these emotions come down to the core human emotion of fear. And that's what the first part of my research kind of unpacked. And I was like, all right, so it's fear. But fear is a difficult one because as human beings, we're fearful of fear itself. We don't like talking
Hmm.
about fear. So now I needed to get into the space of fear and really try to understand, well, what are we actually then fearful of? And
Hmm.
so the book unpacks that. And there are five fears that I look at in the book: the fear of change, the fear of getting it wrong, fear of discomfort, the fear of personal action and its consequences, and the fear of the lack of progress. So five fears.
Mhm.
And so the title, Can I Say That, comes from the second fear, really, around, getting it wrong, because that's a one that I hear so often. And I also experience myself. I think sometimes when we think about fear of DEI, we often assume that it's other people. It's those that are anti DEI, who are on the other side of the valley, who are experiencing this. But I also want to state that, my research and my own personal lived experience shows us that actually even those of us in this space experience fear, and those fears are more focused on the fear of, can I take this personal action, can I be the DI champion, what are the consequences of being that person, right? So very often, I often joke about this, but it's quite real for many of us, and it's something that affects us, because when we walk into a room, when we are a DI practitioner, um, you know, oh, there Purnima comes. We better be politically correct. Oh, don't crack that joke.
Exactly, exactly.
Purnima's here. You get a label to this, and
Mhm,
you lose. I mean, on a personal front, you lose kind of friendships,
mhm.
or even colleagues in the workplace because of that title. So there's a real personal consequence, and you're always labeled that, right? You
Yeah,
have no downtime to this. It's not like it's, a hat that you wear when you're at work, or when you're doing this work maybe for a part of the week. It is always
mhm.
there. Once you get it,
Yeah,
it's part of who you are. So there's a
yeah.
cost to this, and that also, comes with its own things of, can I say that? Should I be bringing this up right now? Should I pick my battles, right? We're constantly going through those thoughts, even for those of us working in this space. So can I say that really comes from that? It is a book that looks at the fears of DEI, across the range of people who are involved and engaged in it, and anti it as well. And more importantly, it's not just a book about addressing or looking at the fears, but it's about how do we let go of the fears? How
Yeah,
do we
exactly,
actually
because
make an effort to let it go? Yeah.
yeah, because fear can stifle you, right? It can make
Oh,
a
absolutely.
mosquito turn into an elephant, and that's not what you want as well.
No.
Throughout what you shared right now, I hear a lot of open-ended questions.
Mm,
I also hear a lot of curiosity. And can you maybe share what the role of curiosity is when it comes to overcoming the fear
yeah.
of getting it wrong in DEI efforts?
Yeah, and that's the second fear, right? So the
Mhm,
fear of getting it wrong, and the counter to that, or what we need to do, is really that curiosity. So for me, curiosity is, there are many levels to this, right? And it builds on the
mhm,
previous nudge that I have in my book, which is openness. So it starts with
mhm.
openness and then builds to curiosity. So I'll start with openness, because there's a natural progression into curiosity.
With
Openness is
openness, you mean vulnerability, or is that
No, so vulnerability is
okay?
another one. Yeah.
Okay.
So with openness, it's really about being open to hearing different perspectives.
Mhm,
Perspectives that are different from your own, that might be very, very different from how you look at the world around you. And in today's world, as I write in my book, we're so used to the idea that everything needs to be debated out, that there's a
mm,
binary way of
yeah,
looking at the world around us, that either you
yeah,
believe in A or you believe in B, and you need to take a
exactly.
stand on this. And when you take
Mhm,
a stand on it, you have to fight for that stand. But the
mhm,
reality is that human existence and interactions don't exist as A or B. They exist
true.
in the grays in between, in the fact that there's multiple realities that can coexist at the very same time. And
Mhm,
openness is about being open to that. Openness is, and that curiosity comes from trying to find out more about how other people look at the world around us, and
mhm,
holding space
yeah,
for that multiplicity of experiences, that non-binary way of looking at the world around us. So that's where curiosity really stems from. Curiosity is also about, in my book, I focus a lot about examining our privilege, and it's about the curiosity to sit with that, like to explore my
mhm,
own privilege. And privilege is such a tricky term. There's so much shame and blame that's associated with privilege, but I
mhm,
would love for people to reframe how we look at privilege, both unearned and earned privilege, and
yeah,
understand that privilege is all the things that, um, you know don't affect me but might be affecting somebody else.
mhm,
It's about checking ourselves when we say, oh, but that's not my experience, it can't be the case, and just pausing before we think that or say that, to say, hang on, it might not be my experience, but where's the other person really coming from? But also
exactly.
reflecting on the fact that privilege comes from so many different things. Yes, it's skin color. Yes, it's wealth and status. It is gender. It is about sexual orientation. It's all of these, but it's also things like what passport we hold. It is about
Mm,
the accent with which we speak a particular
yeah.
language, right?
Yeah.
It is where do we live in the world right now?
Mm-hmm.
And do we have access to good health care? Are we living in peaceful times and peaceful societies? And in today's world, that's so relevant, right? And all of this gives us privilege. And so then it's about the next question is reframing privilege away from shame and guilt to
Mm-hmm.
understanding that how can I use my privilege to lift others, to make it a more positive, inclusive environment for people who might not have the very same privileges that I do. But privilege is also a very nuanced concept because it isn't, you don't have the same privileges at all times. It is contextual, it is time dependent. You might have a privilege today, and tomorrow that very privilege
Yeah.
can be lost. I mean, for
Mm-hmm.
example, with a job, right? You could have a
Yeah.
stable income coming in, and the next moment there's something happens and that's gone. It could even be with being able bodied, you know, right? And at this point in time you are, and then something can happen and that can change
That's
that
my
very,
life.
right.
That's totally my life. Yeah. And
And it's just
I
that over, and it's almost like a split
mhm.
second, right? An
Mhm.
overnight thing that changes how we experience the world. And so it is
Yeah.
that deep curiosity to find out where my privileges exist today in my context and how can I leverage it for others. But
Yeah.
curiosity for me is also about intelligent failures. And I love
Mhm.
this concept that Professor Amy Edmondson writes in The Right Kind of Wrong. She's a Harvard Business School professor, and adapting it into the context of where what we're looking at with DEI. I think a lot of us feel like we're walking around eggshells, right? We're so
Mm.
scared of
Yeah.
saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. Should I put my pronouns down? Should I not put, like, all of these things, right? And it's small things like should I put my pronouns down or not, which have a huge impact on somebody else.
True.
And yet it can be other things that are much more pivotal, right? Around how do I create spaces for people who are different from myself? What kind of strategies do I use? How do I challenge structures and systems in my organization, being the only brown person, let's say, right? So it's
Mhm.
this, and in all of this hesitation of doing this, of can I say that, can I do that, can I, am I going to get it wrong? We forget that we have the opportunity, or should have the opportunity, to make mistakes. And there's a
Mm.
lot of the cancel culture going on right now. You have to either you know it, or if you don't know it, stay away from it. But we don't
Mhm.
allow, again, for the very fact that a lot of this is new to many of us. It's a
Yeah.
new muscle we're trying to develop and build. We don't have, or we don't show that empathy and grace to other people. Now, don't get me wrong, when there's extreme cases of sexual harassment, racism, homophobia, absolutely companies need to
Mhm.
deal with it, and they need to deal with it swiftly with
Yeah.
very precise, clear actions that send a strong message. But a lot of the other aspects of people's experiences are much more subtle. They take place in day-to-day interactions, by the coffee machine, at lunch, during meetings. And in those scenarios, how do we allow for a space where people can make mistakes and experiment and say, this didn't quite work with me being an ally in this way for this person. What have I learned from it? How can I do better? Is there a gap in my knowledge that I need to understand more about this particular group and how they experience the world or my workplace? And we don't allow that space. If someone gets it wrong, they're canceled. We put labels on them, and we create this environment where people don't want to try. I mean, how many
True.
white leaders, male leaders, do I speak to where they might say, I really want to do more, but I'm so scared to do it because if
Mhm.
I get it wrong, it's just I mean, the whole organization will see me as someone who's horribly racist, or that I am, and that I'm going to be canceled. And I'm so scared of that. That's the reality, because we
I
haven't
also
allowed space
believe
for my experimentation.
I also believe that empathy goes both ways, right? I want to touch upon
Yeah.
the part where you talked about privilege, because too often I come into spaces where people see privilege as a dirty word, not realizing
Mm,
that everybody in the world has a certain kind of level of privilege. And when I
mm,
explain that, they then understand, okay, so I have privileges. Yes, everybody has privileges. Only the only thing is that some people have more privileges. And also what you talked about when maybe last year you had a different privilege that doesn't apply to you right now at the moment. I mean, before, just 2 years ago, I broke my ankle, which
Mm,
is for me a challenge nowadays that I can walk. So for those of you who think that everything is, I need pity, no, I don't need pity. I can walk, but standing,
mm,
especially when a lot of these conferences have all these standing tables but no seating chairs, that will be a challenge for me. So oftentimes I do invite people to meet me where I'm at, and let's have a conversation while seated, right? Or let's
yeah,
walk around so that my ankle is moving, because my privileges when it comes to ability and disability are different at the moment right now. And creating that empathy so that we can understand that we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I come into a room, and what you said regarding the label thing, like, oh, we have to behave. No, I want you to be as human as possible as you are. And I want myself to be human as possible I am. Will I make mistakes? Yes. Do I have biases? Oh, yes, because I'm human. I'm not perfect. I'm not AI, which is also not perfect. I'm not a
no,
robot when it comes to perfection. So I'm glad that you addressed that. And I also wanted to share things from my perspective as well. And
thank you.
I mentioned the word vulnerability, right?
Yes.
So can you talk more about the importance of vulnerability when it comes to addressing fear of discomfort in DEI work?
Yeah. So let's talk about first fear of discomfort. Like, what are we
Mhm.
uncomfortable about? And Vivian, you just
Yeah.
shared about biases, right? I think one of the things that as human beings, we'd like to think that we are not biased, but other people are biased. We
Mhm.
have an I am
Yeah,
not biased bias, right?
exactly.
And we think we're very rational, but other people may not be, but I'm very rational, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the reality, from a neuroscience perspective is, just the way our brains function means that everybody is biased.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that means that we have to sit with that discomfort
Mhm.
of the very fact that I am biased. And
Yeah.
even if one of the things that keeps coming up time and again, and I'm sure it does for you in your work as well, Vivian, is, people will say, but I'm not the one who is responsible for colonization or for the systems and
Mm.
structures that have been put in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
But the reality is that if we're benefiting from it in some way or the other,
Yeah.
and it's not always that it's people from one group that are benefiting. Sometimes it's any of us who hold privilege in different ways benefit from certain things that give us advantages and don't give others the similar kind of advantages, or they in fact actively disadvantage
Mhm.
others. And it's sitting with that discomfort. It's sitting with the discomfort of knowing that I am actually benefiting from some of the systems and the way it's been set up, which make it easier for me and it doesn't make it easier for others. So that discomfort. But it's also the discomfort. It's about centering the discomfort of others. I think
Mhm.
very often, when it comes to the whataboutery that we see, right? But no, no, but what about me? Or what about my group? Or what about this group? It's
Yeah.
that, again, it comes back to what I said earlier. It's that binary way of thinking. You put women on the
Mhm.
table and it's like, oh, what about the men? You put men
Yeah.
on the table, oh, what about the women? I mean, we can
Mhm.
actually do things for both groups and across
Mhm.
gender identities.
True.
It doesn't have to be binary, right? And it's that move away from centering my discomfort to centering the discomfort of others, particularly those who are experiencing discrimination, marginalization, being
Yeah.
underestimated, centering their discomfort. I think that's part of the vulnerability, sitting with the very fact that I am biased, and then moving that to centering the discomfort of others, and allowing that vulnerability to be there to hold space for multiple realities to coexist, and not
Mhm.
always knowing the answers. I think one of the
Yeah.
biggest challenges in today's organizations is we expect our leaders to know what to do, to have the answers to everything. But when it comes to being an inclusive leader, it's a muscle we're learning, and every
Mhm.
context is different, every team is different, every organization and its culture is different. So we don't. There's no silver bullet, because if there was a silver bullet that showed that we just needed to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then we're done, then all our organizations would be inclusive. There's so much complexity
Yeah.
with human behavior. We're not those human resources that can be programmed to, no, we're not a robot, as you rightfully said. we come with complexity. And so
Mhm.
inclusive leadership is so nuanced, it has to be contextual, and it is a learning process. And so
Yeah.
leaders don't always have that. So vulnerability is about, not just for leaders in a formal title, but all of us, that we're all going to need to be vulnerable. We need to sit with, first of all, the fact that I am biased.
Mhm.
And even so, like I often say, even someone like me who writes and spends a lot of time researching, bias and how to let it go, I'm absolutely biased, and it
Yeah.
shows up in so many different ways, and in day-to-day interactions, but also in decision making. So that's
Mhm.
what vulnerability is about. Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you something. Given that we're both mothers,
Yeah.
what is something that you encountered that you noticed from a mom lens, how
Mhm.
you responded to your kids that is bias related?
So it's really interesting. So my children uh, are very much into cars and racing and
Mhm.
Formula One
Mhm.
and the like
Yeah.
of. And so I have two stories to share with you today. One is
Mhm.
a more recent one, both involving, interestingly, my older son, but I assure you, my younger son, I have similar interactions with him as well.
Mhm.
But we were watching this program on Netflix called Drive to Survive, which is basically the
Yeah.
behind the scenes of Formula One. And this was the
Mhm.
latest season that had just happened. And there was one of the drivers had his partner, who she was there for pretty much all the races. So
Mhm.
I just casually made a comment about, I wonder what she does, and she must have a lot of flexibility to be able to be at all these races. And my
Mhm.
son said, oh, but he's so rich. She doesn't really need to work, does
Yeah.
she?
Oh.
Right. And look, I mean, I think in my household I'm very verbal and vocal about my work, and my
Mhm.
children know this. I'm constantly
Yeah.
talking about this. But it got me thinking about social conditioning, isn't it? Because it's one thing is your is yes, your you as a parent, and this is so deeply, I mean, this is my ikigai, right? So it's not
Yeah.
something that I do from 9 to 5. I live this, and it's something I
Mhm.
talk about all the time. I'm constantly correcting them when they're watching Top Gear and Jeremy Clarkson says
Yeah.
something that's inappropriate.
Oh,
I'm in the
yeah.
room, and and
Yeah.
nowadays my kids know, we know, mom, we got it. They
Mhm.
know what I'm going to say. So I'm really that kind of mom who's on top of the case with these things. And
Mhm.
despite that, there's social conditioning around this, right?
Yeah.
Around the role, the gender roles. Um, but it's also, I'm going to share a flip side to this. And it's my same son. And this was a few years ago, where he had a guest speaker in school who was speaking
Mhm.
about data and data science. It was,
Mhm.
someone had come in. And at the dinner table, I asked, was he a dad from school? And as the words rolled off my mouth, I was like, "Oh shit! I hope no one noticed." But no, no, no. My
Mhm.
family's very well trained, as I said. So my son pounced on me and he said,
Yeah.
"Mom, that was so biased of you. It was a
Yeah.
woman." And if I was
Yeah.
very honest, I had a very clear image in my mind. Someone working in Google and data science had to be Indian. I could tell you which city he was from, what languages he spoke, what his wife looked like, how many kids they had,
Yeah.
what the names of the children were, what food he enjoyed eating. I knew it all, right? I had the
Mhm.
clear cookie cutter image in my head. So, your children, as a mother and in being a mom in this space, I think there's so much of learning from them, because they're the younger
Mhm.
generation and they have
Definitely.
so much
Yeah.
more awareness, and a lot of the things that we don't see, they see, and they
Mhm.
accept very readily. um, and then there's the other side of, well, also challenging back, because I think, especially as a mom of two boys and who are teenagers, there is a lot of, I'm sure, you and maybe some of our listeners as well have watched adolescents, right, on Netflix.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is this,
Definitely.
and the research shows, that young men are becoming much more conservative in their views, and they
Mhm.
believe that, gender rights have just gone too far, women's rights have just gone too far. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier around the binary thinking. We have placed, and it's a good thing. Please don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Absolutely a supporter of women and girls' rights, but that doesn't mean that it had to be at the expense of boys and young and men,
Exactly.
right?
I
And we've
agree. I
we've
agree.
played this
Yeah.
polarizing game, and we're binary game, and women are doing well, girls are doing well. We're seeing much more
Mhm.
young women getting through university, graduating with great grades and all of that. But unfortunately, it's at the expense of men and
Mhm.
young boys. And so I'm also very conscious as a mother, that as a mother of two boys in particular, that I am also lifting them, that I'm
Yeah.
also, yes, I constantly fight for the rights of women and girls, and I'm also lifting boys and young men as well.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
children, their friends, but also, the young men in my classrooms, right? That I get the opportunity as an educator, to have an influence on. So that's thinking about a mom and the nurturing role, as well. I think there's so much there to learn, but and to be
Mhm.
humble and learn from the mistakes that we and errors that we make, but also then to influence and challenge, right? So I did engage with my son on a conversation. I was going to kind of, be a bit more, reactive, I think, but my husband thankfully, said, honey, you know you did give birth to him, so you know you might want to you might want to calm down the emotions. And so we
Yeah.
had a rich conversation, and before he went to bed, he said, mom, thanks for bringing that up. I hadn't
Yeah.
realized that, but I was really biased. Yeah.
Yeah, and also our kids are humbling ourselves, right? Because I had something similar, but I will share a different perspective. So when Orlando was 4 or 5,
Mm,
there is this Dutch television network that were saying that everything is all for boys, where they showed Transformers, where they showed
mm,
racing, where they show all the things that you would label as a boy, but not knowing that his mom is a Transformer geek. His mom
yeah.
loves Lego, right? No
Mm.
matter
Oh,
what kind of Lego. Don't bring in that Formula One thing because that's a
mm,
whole other conversation that I want to have off the side. But I love the things that maybe
yeah.
men wouldn't say that I would love, but I love building Lego. I have some of these Lego
Mhm,
elements behind me, built by Orlando.
yeah.
And these are the things that we need to rewrite. And also towards Lego, let's look at the Lego Dreams
Mm,
version that are supposed to be for girls, which in my lens is very simplified.
yeah.
Girls also want to do some challenging Lego things, right? So for me, when I have a few young girls within my network, I buy them the Lego things that a boy could do, right? Because they want to be challenged as well. So we have to be mindful how we condition the youngsters, but also how can we support and help them to become the inclusive leaders that we see in them as well. Yeah,
Exactly. Thanks for
yeah,
sharing that. Yeah. And, very
yeah.
much like you, I did engineering, my bachelor's degree is in engineering, so it's also, these stereotypes around women and what we do, what we enjoy and what we
Yeah.
don't. And vice versa, right? For
Mhm,
boys to be, it's okay for them to be, like my children had a, kind of a barbecue set where they would cook when they were, toddlers,
mhm.
pretend cooking.
Yeah, yeah,
And to move away from those genderized assumptions around what
yeah,
is, and the thing is, at home you can do all of this. As I've realized,
mhm.
it's the minute they get into preschool and they get into school,
Yeah, yeah,
that's when those gender roles really, really, start taking place, right? So by the age of
yeah.
between 5 to 7, that's when gender biases really are cemented in the minds of young people.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, I could go on and on, but I also want to talk about your book. This one is for the leaders. How can leaders create a safe environment for their team members to express their fears and concerns about DEI?
Yeah, I think, when I work with leaders, one of the things is, it comes back to vulnerability, what we talked about
Mhm.
earlier, is for them to share their fears,
Yeah.
and in doing so, you create and allow, for others to do the same.
Mhm.
And you also need to, as a leader, it's about making sure that people understand that there's no repercussions, negative repercussions to this,
Mhm.
because they help us to improve the decision making, improve our engagement with each other and collaboration with each other. They help improve the kind of environment and culture that we're in. And like I said earlier, I do have a disclaimer here. When it's extreme cases, they need to be dealt
Mhm.
with in the right
Yeah.
ways. Now, here I'm talking about really kind of the day-to-days, day-to-day interactions, and where we want to have these more honest, open conversations about, what, I have this deeply rooted bias about this, or, the decision that we made the other day. I really think, maybe we made it too fast. Maybe we should
Mhm.
have looked for additional pieces of information. Now, if leaders start doing that and expressing
Yeah.
those kind of fears, as well as where their errors are, or that, what, I'm sitting right now and where the world is, I'm actually really afraid. I'm afraid of being canceled. I'm afraid of, having a conversation with people about these topics. Like, can we create that space for that? And that comes from leadership, because you're sending that
Mhm.
message to the organization that it's okay to do so, and that there's not going to be a negative repercussion of doing so. I think
True.
that's super important. But also to remind people that it's not just the responsibility of those from marginalized, underrepresented groups to
Mhm.
voice it, because they're
Yeah.
often the ones who are holding forth. They're the ones who are addressing it. If you look at who leads up or volunteers to set up ERGs, employee resource groups, or volunteers their time to organize the women's International Women's Day events or the Pride events, etc., it's often people from underrepresented groups who end up
Mhm.
doing this work. And
Yeah.
so it's about the leaders also saying that, for those in the majority who are in dominant groups, to say, hey, we need to step up. We can't be fearful of
Mhm.
this. We have to engage in this. We have
Yeah.
to not just engage in it and show up, but we need to play an active role in working in partnership with those of our colleagues from underrepresented groups, so that we're able to bridge the divide, rather than
Mhm.
sitting on opposite sides of the valley. Yeah.
I want to add something to that because when it comes to ERGs, too many times I don't see leaders becoming sponsors. And
Yeah.
sponsor can be sponsoring your time, sponsoring your creativity and innovation. Of course, also sponsoring a budget so that they can do the
Absolutely.
things that they can do and challenge inclusion or build towards inclusion, right? So I wanted to add that on. We have come to the final question, and that is, 2030 is almost around the
Mhm.
corner. And what is your wish for humanizing the workplace and what people can say?
You know, I It's such a great question. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I think I might have answered that question a little bit differently from where we're sitting right
Mhm.
now in 2025. So as I look ahead
Mhm.
to 5 years into the future,
Yeah.
um, my hopes, my wishes are that we live in a world that is far less polarizing than it is today.
Mm. Yeah.
That we are learning how to bridge the divide that
Mhm.
seems unsurmountable right now. It's like we're, the divide between that camp and this camp is just
Mhm.
massive. It's this massive valley. So my
Yeah.
hope and wish is that we build that, and we build that through empathy, empathetic conversations with each other, engagement with each other, having more nuanced conversations, moving away from that binary thinking, holding space for multiple realities, to really coexist. I think that
Mhm.
would be my wish for 2030. And you had a second part to that question. What was that, Vivian?
What people can say.
What people can say. My favorite. So I have two things that people can say that
Mhm.
can really transform the way we look at and our interactions with others. Number one is tell me more.
Yeah.
Simple. Tell me more.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're unsure about what someone said and you think, where are they coming
Yeah,
from? Why did
exactly.
they say that? Tell me more. Tell me more about
Mm.
yourself. Tell me more about where you're coming from. Tell me more. You can add something to it, but tell
Yeah.
me more. And the other one is to diffuse the tensions that often come up
Mhm.
when our biases are pointed out. Um, Good catch is my favorite. When my
Mm.
biases are pointed out, just saying, good catch. Thanks for pointing it out. I need to do some reflection on this. So, good
Yeah.
catch. So, what can people say? Tell me more and good catch. Start there
Yeah.
and you can
Yeah.
scaffold from there.
I love that. I love that. And also there, yeah, my wish is the same when it comes to the polarization. I know that it will take time, but I don't understand did we begin to see the other as objectifying the other instead of realizing that there are both two women on this platform, that we are people. People have hurt,
Mhm.
they have feelings, they have emotions. When do we see people, when did we start to see people as
Yep.
less than ourselves?
Yep.
I don't
Absolutely.
understand that. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Poornima, for the conversation today.
Thank
And for
you.
those of you who are watching or listening to this conversation, connect with Poornima, get one of her books or get all of her books because it's really interesting. Given the time right now, it's a much needed resource that you need to have on your bookshelf. So thank you, Poornima. And until
Thank you
next
for
time,
having me.
everybody.